Holly from 50% Before 2050, and today I'm here to talk to you about assessment as learning, assessment for learning, and assessment of learning as outlined in Margo Gottlieb's Assessing English Language Learners, Bridges to Educational Equity, Connecting Academic Language Proficiency to Student Achievement. So prior to reading this particular text, I was only familiar with summative assessment and formative assessment. So traditionally, formative assessment is the informal assessment completed throughout a unit of learning that is used for informational purposes. That is to gauge students' understanding of a topic in order to ensure that they're actually getting it. And traditionally, the summative assessment is the big end of the unit exam that's given to students to determine whether or not they achieve those content objectives in the allotted time. However, according to Gottlieb, if the assessment is used in any way to inform instruction, then it's formative assessment. So that is, if you give that big end of the unit summative test and see that your students didn't really get it, and so you decide to spend another week going over the content again and clearing up any misconceptions that they showed, then really that test was formative. So according to that logic, the only summative assessment that we really give is the big end of the year high stakes tests that we don't even get the answers to until after we have an entirely new class of students. So let's go ahead and start with assessment as learning. Assessment as learning was the newest form of formative assessment for me, and I'm mostly going to focus on that because it was new to me and because it seemed really important to me. So this form of assessment uses assessment as a learning tool. Assessment as learning. So assessment as learning is student-centric, and it focuses on metacognitive and metalinguistic awareness, building student agency and encouraging students' growth. Therefore, like many of the tools in the ESL Teacher Toolkit, assessment as learning isn't just for English learners. It's just a great teaching practice that's beneficial for all students. One thing important to mention is that assessment as learning is an assessment that just occurs at the end of the unit when the teacher plops a test in front of her students. This is a continuous, ongoing form of assessment that allows students to track their progress throughout the learning process. While assessment as learning is student-centered, teachers play an important role in setting the academic and language goals, formulating the criteria for success, communicating that criteria, and especially with English learners, gradually releasing the responsibility to the student in self-assessing. While assessment as learning may initially be initiated by the teachers, optimally it should be intrinsically motivated and initiated by students. Moving on to assessment for learning. Assessment for learning is teacher-centered, and the data generated through assessment for learning is used for the formative process. The Council of Chief State School Officers defines formative assessment as a process used by teachers and students during instruction that provides feedback to adjust ongoing teaching and learning to improve students' achievement of intended instructional outcomes. Assessment for learning is much closer to the formative assessment that I first learned in my undergraduate, when teachers informally assess students and adjust the teaching process. Assessment for learning allows teachers to reflect and to adjust their own teaching practices. And finally, we have assessment of learning. Assessment of learning is really neither student-centered nor teacher-centered. In fact, Gottlieb says that assessment of learning is generally imposed upon teachers rather than created by them. The purpose of assessment of learning is to provide data for those state and local accountability tests. So the assessment of learning includes the interim measures that occur at intervals throughout the year, such as fall, winter, and spring testing required by different districts or schools, looking forward to the end of the year high stake tests, and those high stake tests that occur on an annual basis. In summation, assessment as learning, assessment for learning, and assessment of learning really expand formative and summative assessment. As I mentioned earlier, my favorite of the three is assessment as learning because it's new and because I think it's so important for us to empower our students to take control of their learning and just be empowered as learners. So that is what I have for you today. Thank you so much for tuning in and learning a little bit about Margo Gottlieb's assessment as learning, assessment for learning, and assessment of learning. Thank you so much.